Barney is correct. We normally do not refinance our own debt. There is to be some really significant things going on for the board to even contemplate that. So if the city of Blanco, is that the only community we would be looking at with outstanding debt? Would that be the city of Blanco? Yes. Okay. So if the city of Blanco does have outstanding debt on the open market, it might be eligible for refinancing through the Texas Water Development Board. But you guys find yourselves in a very unique situation in that the federal government is looking at distributing significant amounts of money to the state and to local communities for infrastructure. And I know the cities are getting money, the unincorporated areas, the counties, and the state. And so, I think Barney mentioned $500,000 in additional storage. I'm always looking for ways to, help our partners. And so I would encourage us to, look and see if this storage might be eligible for some of that federal funding. I don't know what your timeline is like. And I don't know who is administering those dollars at the local level, but certainly it's definitely worth exploring. We still don't have guidance at the state level whether or not the Water Development Board will receive the funds through the governor's office for water infrastructure. So, Dane's very, very knowledgeable in our local programs, excuse me, not our local programs, our state programs, and, that the locals benefit from. So I definitely want to give him the opportunity to speak about what your options may be under our existing programs. But I don't want you to forget that, the nation actually finds itself in a very unique situation where there's going to be dollars specifically for water infrastructure. And we want to make sure that our Texas citizens benefit from those dollars to the fullest extent possible. So with that, I'll turn over the mic to Dane.
Thanks, Rebecca. And let me see if I can get my video going also. Here we go. Kind of my camera's down there. I thought maybe I could start with kind of the end in that Rebecca was discussing the potential infrastructure funding that we could be receiving. I worked on the release of funding back when we had the, whatever you want to call it, the financial crisis back in 2008, which is the last time in which I remember in which the federal government did give us a lot of funding in order to distribute it pretty quickly. And so if this looks similar to that, I know that the emphasis was at that point in time, at least, and I think it's always something that comes up, is if you've got projects that are ready to move forward, those are the ones that typically they're easy to pick up and get funded. So that's one of the assessments that we did back then, was to see, are they, quote, shovel ready? So I just want to put that out there. If we do move in that direction, having a project that's moved along, you may have several projects, but having one that's farther along is beneficial in that type of situation. The other thing that I wanted to point out is, with any of the funding that we do, or most of the funding, it's federal government. We administer it for, to pass through to us. And the funding is always based on prioritization of projects. So, we can talk about, ways to get grants and the grants that are available and cheap financing. But especially now, how the project itself ranks is very important to get funding, because if the project doesn't rank high enough compared to other ones that we receive, you can apply every year and still not get funding because there's other projects ahead of you. So that's an important consideration to make sure that I think that you're using your time wisely to make sure that there's a good chance of the project getting funded. So with that, what you turn to is, we put out a report that's required by EPA called the Intended Use Plan. And if you look on our website under either the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, that's where it has information on the right sidebar. I could share my screen. It may take a minute or two to get through to that point, but I think you guys should be able to find it on our website. But the intended use plan is what we put together annually, and that shows our priorities for the year. It shows how much money we're going to receive and how we expect to spend it. But what it has in the back, there's some appendices, and one of them shows you the criteria that we use to rank projects. So these are two programs, and these are the two primary programs that our borrowers use and grant recipients. The clean water is primarily for sewer projects, but it's got some crossover in that you can use it for reclaimed water. The drinking water program is primarily for water infrastructure projects, but you can also use it for reclaimed water projects. The benefit is typically you want to go with the sewer one, the clean water, because it gets more of a subsidy from the federal government. And what that does is reduces the interest rates that are applicable to your loan. Other than that, they're very similar. So, I was going to see if I could share my screen, just give you an idea.
I did make you a co-host if you would like to share your screen, Dane.
Okay. Let's see if I can get this. I have it on a second monitor. This is always tricky. I'm used to using Teams, but even there, it's so.
You are up.
It worked.
All right. Hopefully you're seeing a OneNote page and not all my emails. So what I did here is I just copied and pasted the guidance from that. This is in the back of our intended use plan. And so if you look at it, I've just kept the numbers for each. It goes, from the highest ranked, there's some that are higher ranked down below, but it shows you the points that you're awarded for these different characteristics of your project. It's typically what you're addressing. So for example, you see you get 30 points if you have an enforcement action with TCEQ, in which it imposes a schedule. And then you get, fewer points. So it's got if you look down the list, it's got the different, there often are multiple things that apply. So you want to get the, highest points possible. This is also important for this particular funding cycle. So with, I don't know how broad I want to go, but basically with 2020, we determined that we needed to make some changes to our funding in order to keep these programs viable long term. We get a grant from the federal government, but then we use the repayments, to make loans, additional loans each year. In order to maintain that, we had to make some adjustments to the programs at the end of 2020. The reason why that's important for you guys now is ranking is incredibly important. We used to have about double the amount of funds in both of these programs. And what I can do in that situation is, even if your project didn't rank very well, I could eventually, after we've, made offers to all the higher ranked projects, and say, hey, I've got, 50 million left over. If you guys have a project, go ahead and send in an application. I don't expect to be in that situation this year or the next year. Farther out, it could go back to where we were before, where we had additional funds, and ranking, while still important for getting grant funds, isn't a requirement in order to get loan funds. So that's why I'm stressing up front to look at the project ranking. I don't know what engineering groups you have involved with the projects that you're contemplating, but typically I work, the engineering firms are comfortable or familiar with this ranking, and they can assess your project and determine how well it would rank.
And Dane, may I add one other thing?
Sure.
So while Dane was talking, and I don't know who we need to talk to at the city of Blanco, but the Water Development Board, in order to make a new loan, we have to have updated audited financial statements. Um, that is one of the ways we assess the financial strength of the city. And it looks like the last audit we received was for your fiscal year ended 2019. So if an audit isn't forthcoming right away, I mean, I'm worried that your 20 audit may not be timely. So you might want to check into that too, because it's
So,
going to be
good
very
morning.
important to have that.
Yeah, good morning. This is Kelly Kinser. We're very aware that you would need our audit. The 2020 audit is going to be presented to the council on July the 13th. I've never been a part of a city where an audit is this late, so I was a little bit confused. But I know that she will have it finished by next week, and it'll be presented to the council, and then it will be sent to any of our grantors or
Sure,
anybody that gave us loans.
sure,
And
sure.
okay.
That's great news, Kelly. And if it makes you feel better, it does happen. We do
Yeah,
see it.
I,
So
I had not seen it before, so yeah, that does make me feel better. Thank you.
yeah.
And that reminds me, I don't know, Kelly, if you're consulting for the city or work with the city, but I have worked with Blanco for the last, I would say, 5 years on their projects. So I do know that the audits have been something that was difficult to get in for the original application. And it sounds like maybe there's been some difficulty after that. Before it was a little bit easier when our community was a little bit behind on their audits. But again, with this lower amount of total funds, so before someone was able to submit an application, they didn't have their audit done, they were late, I could kind of wait for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
It's become more critical to have that audit done. I try to work with communities as much as I can, but there is a point at which I have to ask them to withdraw their application. So that has become a more critical item for them, for that to be done timely. So I just wanted to put that out there because I don't want you guys to go through a bunch of work to get a project forward and then we don't have the audit. And so I have to withdraw the application. When the funds aren't as scarce, it's a little bit less competitive and I can, maybe wait a little bit longer. But at this point, with them being more competitive, I have to be a little bit quicker to say, if you don't have everything lined up that you need to get a commitment of funds, and we need to withdraw the application. So that'll be critical for you guys here also.
We really appreciate those comments. I'm a former grant administrator and I've done project management, and I definitely understand how important getting those audits out and making sure that we have our audit finished in a timely manner. And so I truly believe with this council and the direction that they're trying to go, that some of these things are going to be cleaned up in Blanco. And that is definitely one of them. So thank you for your comments.
Thanks.
Thanks. And Dane, I was wondering, would you mind sharing this file here, or this summary with us, maybe via email, or share with Barney that he can share with us?
Sure. Do you mean now or after the?
Oh, any time. Yeah, it'd be great today.
Yeah, I could just email this page. I've got this set up for clean water.
It's a nice summary.
Yeah, so it just summarizes the information. There's more details if you go into the intended use plan. That'll give you, so if you have questions on any of these and want to look into it more deeply, I would go there. So we have this for both the drinking water and the clean water, same setup.
Dane, can I ask a question? This is Jennifer, and
Sure.
this may be pretty basic. So if we need to go offline, that's fine, or talk about it later. But the intended use plan, it looks like it came out late December 2020, and that's the guide for how you're gonna do like a set or distribute a set of funds on an annual basis. When do what's the timing with applications and the fund? Like, can you just give like a brief overview of that? If it's
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And if you try to track how things worked over this last year, then you would definitely be confused with the adjustments that we had to make. We also made some adjustments in our timing. This next funding cycle, we expect to be back onto our standard cycle. So where we are now is kind of midstream. So typically we receive what's a short form called a project information form for any projects that want to get funding, and that's traditionally been required to be submitted in the first week of August. Or I'm sorry, not August, March. Sorry, beginning of the year. And so we take in those project information forms and we evaluate the projects and go through a ranking process. So that's where we take the points that I showed you guys, and we look at each one of the projects and assign points based on the characteristics that you have in the project information form. That form is a short form that has a budget in it. So it's required that you have someone with a PE certification fill out that budget. I'm sure the intention is to make sure we've got an estimate that's accurate. So because that's what we use to then determine the level of grant funds that we can provide to a project. And if you get loan funds only, we also use that. So it's important that you have an accurate estimate. Of course, as what happened with the case of Blanco, you may actually get your bids in later and realize that you need additional funding. We of course try to provide additional funding. In the case with Blanco before, it was when we had a lot more funds available, and so it wasn't that big of a deal to just go back to our board and ask for additional funding. I believe in the current scenario that we're in, that we could still go back and probably get those funds, because I think we would prioritize anybody a project we've already funded, but I haven't come across that scenario. So I just want to put that out there, that before I could say, oh, no problem, you need another $1 million for your project, just request it and I can obtain it for you. But in this new scenario, I haven't encountered that, but that's how that has worked for Blanco in the past. So the project information form, again, has a budget on it. It also has a description of the project. It's a very basic description. You also fill out information about the demographics for the community, and this is where you get the census information. And we use that information to decide if it's a disadvantaged community. I don't remember if Blanco qualifies or not. And that's based on the median household income for the community. And we get that from the census information that's available. If for some reason you believe the information is not very accurate, you can do a survey, an income survey. Typically, you see that in rural areas where there's a lot of variation within a county. So maybe the overall county doesn't show up as being disadvantaged, but a section of the county that wants to apply for funding does. For the city of Blanco, probably what you have in the census is if you do an income survey, it should show something very similar, assuming that the census information is relatively accurate. So that probably won't apply to you guys, but just in case that question comes up, that's how we determine disadvantage. So the basic threshold for that is the median household income for the community needs to be below 75% of the state's median household income. I used to have this memorized because I was a financial analyst. I don't know what it is currently. I believe the state median household income, is in the low 50s right now. So it's 75% of that. And then we also use criteria as far as the affordability of your rates to determine how much grant we can give to the project. So if it's, we give it at different levels. So it can be 30% loan forgiveness, 50% loan forgiveness. I think I have the rest of it in here. We've modified this slightly over the years. And I have, if you could still see my screen, I've actually got it summarized here. So we have 30%, 50%, and 70% loan forgiveness. Without getting too much into the details, the other thing that comes into play to decide how much is the affordability of your rate. So if you see these few figures that I have, 1% to 1.5% is 30%. What that's saying is if you're that percentage points above the household cost factor for your area. Household cost factor is just simply if your rates are 2% of the median household income. So if you look at your monthly bill, multiply it by 12, of course, to annualize it, and then divide by your median household income. If the percentage for one service is above 1%, however much it's above 1%, shows where you qualify here for disadvantaged. For two services, which would be water and wastewater, it's above 2%. So that just gives you a basic idea of how that's calculated. I don't do that. We have a group here that does that whenever you submit the project information form. So, typically you've done this assessment before you've sent in an application, so you have an idea of where you fall.
Dane, can I interrupt you real quick?
Sure.
Do we know if Blanco was able to get any of those forgiveness? I mean, we did loans pretty recently there, so were they close, or is there something that you expect to change?
Yeah, I'll look it up real quickly here on my database. I can find it pretty quickly. Let's see. Huh.
I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time if we were not going to be able to go the loan forgiveness route, but it's such a great program if Blanco could qualify. The other kind of question I'm having as we're going through this is trying to sort out, is there a potential that we can add it to the existing project, add the debt, or are we thinking that it has to be a new application at this point? Is the other question. And I didn't know.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. There's there's so many directions we can go with this presentation. So, yeah, I know we were earlier talking about the ability to refinance, and I thought I would give you guys some guidance on that. I just looked up as far as whether the city did qualify as disadvantaged in the past, and they did not for the project that I worked on with them. So as far as refinancing,
I have a quick.
Sure.
Sorry, thank you. If the city did not apply for disadvantage, I'm just curious how they've received a CDBG grant in the past. And I know you have to have areas that meet those requirements. So I'm just curious how that happened.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't on your side. Maybe it was on the CDBG side. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder because years ago, I used to work as a grant administrator also, and I worked on those CDBG grants for rural communities. And I was trying to remember, because I think I was getting some of the rules that I had then mixed up with some of the ones that we have here for a while.
Okay.
So I'm trying to remember if you could qualify like at the neighborhood level for those. So it seems like that you could have.
Are you talking about with the CDBG funds?
Yeah, with the CDBG funds, because I know that
you can definitely qualify at a neighborhood level.
Yeah. So this we're talking about is the city level, which is typically, because you've got income from all across the spectrum, there. So it could be that the CDBG was just an income survey was done for a neighborhood within Blanco, and they qualified. Okay, that's my guess without knowing anything more about it.
Sure. Yeah, that would definitely be a good guess. So then my question, I guess, is there any way Blanco could qualify? Obviously, it didn't meet the qualifications for the whole community, but is there areas that they might, actually make the cut within the city that we could, at least fund part of the project, lines or something like that. Does that make sense?
And that's what I was trying to remember between the two programs. I have not seen it at the neighborhood level. I believe that the criteria or the way of thinking about it is because the work is considered to be beneficial for the entire system. So the system wide or the entire city is who qualifies for the project. I have seen in rural areas, though, as I was saying, I've seen like basically like a mobile home park where they've done income surveys, and they were able to qualify as disadvantaged because some of those communities the income is extremely low,
Right.
and that does help them to qualify. I have not seen that in cities themselves. And in my understanding from discussion with others is that's, and this is something I could look into further, but that it's that the work is typically benefiting the entire city of Blanco, or it's considered to be helping all of Blanco, not just the neighborhood. Even though, of course, when you're replacing lines, it can be in different places.
Sure. I was just trying to find
So
some way to qualify.
Yeah, I understand. So as far as back on the refinancing question, it is difficult to do, and I want to say that up front. I have done, I think, 1 or 2 refinancings, and I've been with the agency for 16 years, so that gives you an idea of how often. And I think what I've seen is the issue typically is, in order for us to fund work, you have to have demonstrated that you went through and qualify as if you went with us originally. And where this typically shows up is in the environmental finding needed for the project. So unless the original funding was with USDA or some other federal or state funding program, the chances are that the city went through all the environmental, got the environmental approvals that are needed for us to adopt that environmental finding. It's very low. So I think I had one community where they just had finance. I think it was with USDA, and we were able to refinance that debt. As Rebecca was saying earlier, we don't refinance our own debt. I know there can be some extreme situations in which we would break that, but we don't do that as a rule. So I don't know what Blanco's situation is as far as what other debt they have, but if they had USDA or something like that, there's a possibility that we could refinance.
Okay.
So,
and I think, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm understanding at this point, and maybe Barney or Kelly, if you're hearing something different, but it sounds like in order to obtain additional funds through Water Development Board, if we wanted to use them to help fund a project, this would be a new application and a new project. Is that what y'all are hearing?
I'm definitely hearing that is the way we should go, but it doesn't seem like it's maybe completely impossible for Blanco to refinance. But definitely the first way to go, absolutely. And I'd like to talk to bond counsel and Rebecca Trevino about that in a little more detail. So I'm hoping I can get Rebecca Trevino's direct number from somebody here.
And also the other way that I see work done, that is a possibility, but I don't think it would be in Blanco's particular situation because they had to obtain additional funds to complete the projects they have with us.
Mm-hmm.
If they discover at some point that, well, hey, actually we're going to have funds left over, we can approve a funding for other projects. If the projects are very closely related, the additional work, I can actually approve it at the team level. So if you're replacing water lines and you want to replace more water lines in an area that wasn't originally contemplated, that's pretty easy to do. If you want to do work that's water related but not exactly replacing lines, then I can usually do that with some approval from higher level approval than myself. If you want to do something that's still eligible, so again, if it's clean water, it has to be something that's eligible within the clean water program, but it's fairly different or quite a bit different from the original project, I can take it back to our board to see if they'll approve it. And again, this is if you have remaining funds. So I don't know where Blanco is exactly with reconciling what's needed to finish the project, but we always want to make sure that they finish the original project before we would commit to anything additional.
Absolutely. So what I'm understanding is that if Blanco has a project right now and we decide to enhance it, supplement it, that there's a possibility to do a refi with an addition to that note. Did I hear that correctly?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow. I got lost somewhere in there.
Okay,
I
so
thought it was going in one direction and it went another.
Okay, so let's just say that Blanco has a project right now, and they want to either extend it or add to it. What could they, if the application was approved, then from that original project, could Blanco then refinance that loan plus whatever addition they need, or they needed, as long as it's directly related to that project? Supplement the project.
I think for me, I'm a little unclear as to when you're talking about the project, is this one that's currently funded by us or funded by another government entity? Or
no, so it's currently funded by you. If we have a project that's open, that's currently funded by you,
yeah,
and it's not quite complete, but we have discovered that there's more that needs to be added to the project. So we're not doing a different project. We're enhancing this project. Is it possible to enhance the project, which would mean adding to the note and then refinancing it?
The refinancing part is not something we'd be able to do. As far as adding to the project, our first look at it would be, do you guys have the funds available to finish up the original work that you had presented to us? I guess you could say, hey, look, we thought we were going to do this and we decided that it's not the best way to go. And you could take something out, I suppose, and reduce the cost of the original project. And then, oops, hey, now you've got additional money left. So you could do it that way.
Okay.
If that additional work were closely related, of course, then it would be fairly easy to approve it. It's called, we call our acronym is RUF, remaining unused funds.
Okay.
But again, it's unused funds, so it has to. We have to prove up that you've done all the work that you originally were going to do, or you've decided, hey, this was in the original scope, but consulting with our professional engineer, we've determined that we do not, this would not be in our best interest to move forward with this. If there's still, you'd still have to demonstrate the original problem that you were trying to address has been addressed. So you can't just say, oh, we decided we don't want to solve that problem anymore.
Sure.
So, that's where you could run into an issue, is if you took something out, but you still have that remaining issue that you were trying to resolve, then we'd say, no, you got to go ahead and maybe you do something different than what you did. And maybe the different thing is more efficient, so you don't need as much money. And so you have leftover funds. So you could do it that way.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the current balance is or available funds on that existing loan, Kelly. The only thing I can think of with regard to what Dane's talking about was the idea I had kind of listening to that discussion with Mr. Palmer in the city and thinking about TLAP, was that if you don't need a discharge pipeline because you're doing a TLAP, could those funds be redirected? I'm not saying that's what we want to do, but that would be a situation where I'm thinking you could take something out of the existing scope, achieve it another way with additional storage. So,
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. That makes sense. Speaking of discharge, what is your understanding of where the city of Blanco discharges?
who's you?
Any of you that have been involved with the BWRTF,
Right. So,
or the Texas Water Development Board, even,
right.
or
The
TEQs, just anybody. I want to know what your understanding is.
well, the discharge would come from the ponds, and then whatever is needing to or is not able to be irrigated. The discharge right now is that ditch that goes across Far Paradise property into the Blanco River.
Exactly. And so your understanding right now is that if by the time Blanco has discharged for irrigation purposes and crop growth, that if they still have additional discharge, it goes across that little thing into the ditch. I mean, across the ditch into the river, right?
Yes.
Okay. So are you aware of any other discharge that Blanco's doing?
No.
Okay. So there is other discharge that I would like to talk to you all about. And I'll get Ronnie or somebody on the phone with me, unless, I don't know if this is the proper venue or not.
I think it is.
Okay. So
I'm actually on the meeting as well, so if you've
Excuse
got
me?
my attention as well. I'm sorry.
who is this?
This Ronnie.
That's Ronnie.
Oh, hey, Ronnie. So one place that they're discharging is at the Best Western Motel, 40,000 gallons a month, and then other times less and a few times more. I mean, other times more and a few times less. And there was an agreement between the city of Blanco, which was never approved by the city administrator nor the council. It was approved by the assistant public works director and a former council member of Blanco. The agreement actually expired in September. And I just found out within the last week or two that Blanco's still not, basically they're giving that water away. And I wanted to know if that was ever brought to the attention of this board or if anybody knew about that.
Well, if I can intervene right there, discharge that this task force pertains to is treated wastewater to the Blanco River from the wastewater treatment plant.
Correct.
What you're speaking of, Kelly, is treated water going through an actual meter for irrigation purposes.
Okay.
It's completely opposite. So yes, of course, yeah, I just don't think this is the place to bring that up, as it doesn't pertain to anything that we're dealing with here.
I would disagree. I do think it pertains to the group here, because if I understand, the goal of the group is not to discharge into the river and to protect the Blanco River. And so I feel like the group needs to know the whole picture.
Right, but discharge of treated wastes or a reuse of treated waste from the wastewater treatment plant, what you're speaking of is an actual water customer. So again, it's not the same.
Kelly, are you saying that, I mean, what happens to the wastewater that's generated by the Best Western? I mean, that's being collected.
That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant.
Well, if
the
that's
Best Western-
irrelevant, then the water used by Best Western's irrelevant for the purpose of this group, I think.
Right.
Okay, so to me, it seems relevant to this group based on the mission that I just read.
Well, Kelly, I think that is something that we'll be taking up as we move forward, assuming the group stays together, to address the more holistic water supply side as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very pertinent to our future work and things that we're considering in terms of how best to utilize the water that the city has. I don't think that there's a concern on, as Barney and Ronnie stated, in terms of what we would consider a wastewater discharge. Yeah.
Okay.
I just realized that the way I have my laptop set up, I may be running out of power soon. So if I go blank for some reason, that's why. I wanted to move on to two things that I thought would be helpful for you guys. I wanted to finish up my discussion of kind of the process, since there was a question about that. The other thing I wanted to point out, and the other source of grant funding for a project, and this one very well may get it from this, is our green funding. And so that's the funding it's not related to income thresholds at all. The issue with it, though, is it's very limited. And so I always want to say that up front, because it'll sound really good, and it is in a sense, but the funding is not very high. If you look in that intended use plan, I think that we've funded it at a level of about $2 million per year. So that's something, but if you've got a big project, that doesn't get you very far. So,
Dane, you talked about, I'm sorry, Dane, you talked about the federal funds that are available through the ARPA program. Is that something, do you know when those funds are going to become available, and what presumably you guys are going to be involved somewhat in the administrating of those funds. Is that something that the group ought to pursue right now? I mean, that's a grant rather than a loan. So in that sense, it's much more appealing than the programs the Water Development Board's administering right now. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Is this the funding that Rebecca was talking about initially?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't have any information on that yet. Okay. We've been told to kind of, we have to wait and see. We don't have any additional guidance. So I do know previously when I worked on again with a financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, it all happened very quickly. It was, projects that were ready to go. We, immediately, sent out invitations to send in new applications. I don't know if we required the project information form that I just described or not. The project information form is what's used for ranking projects. So I assume that we would still rank the projects at that point. So the next part of the process for that, and what we're in right now, is we rank all the projects, and then typically in August we send out an invitation to send in the application itself. So the city could qualify, even if they did have the income threshold or meet the income threshold, for disadvantage, they could qualify for up to 50%. But it depends on what other projects are ahead of it in the rankings. And so those that are the top ones, and we have to determine each year based on how much money we have available, how many we're going to invite in. And we typically do that the last week of August. And we give you usually 4 to 6 weeks to submit an application. So you're usually going to have a heads up about this time of the year. You'll see, we'll give a draft of, where the projects rank. So you'll be able to get started on your application. So that's the other consideration for the standard, either clean water or drinking water state revolving fund, is it's a structured, schedule. So you submit your project information form in March, and if you get an invitation in the first round, it's going to be in August. So if the timing of your project is such that you can't wait like that, then the SRF program is not a good approach. But the SRF is the cheapest source of funding that I could provide.
And Dane, just in case we lose you, I want to find out. So are you saying that there's no way for the city to get in this current year's round? We're too late for a project to apply at this point?
They would need to be thinking towards March of next year.
March of next year. And then assuming they qualify, an invitation sent out in August, when would funding be available?
And that depends on, how many applications we get. I've been able to get them done in about 90 days. Okay. But if there's a lot of other applications at the same time, or if there are questions. So for example, when I worked on Blanco's project before, we did wait for the audit to come in. So that did delay the application by about 2 months. So I would say 3 months is optimistic. 4 months is the normal rate now, and 6 months if there are any questions, anything that we need to pursue. You then typically have up to a year to close on the funds that are awarded. However, if there is grant funds involved, you only have 6 months to close on that. So it just depends on what they get. So I would think for this project that the eye would be towards is the potential green funding enough, for the project. I don't know what the total project cost is, if you guys have an estimate at this point.
Around $500,000 is what specifically we're looking, kind of the idea we're looking for right now. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how TCEQ would have to weigh in on this as well, based on what the city wants to do and what TCEQ wants to do. Then you've got political considerations in terms of turnover of council and all of that kind of stuff. So, and I've been through that rodeo before.
Yeah.
Also been through the route where we actually received disadvantaged funds for the city of Buda with a neighborhood project there to get some engineering work done, like 70%. But it's very hard to qualify because there's very competitive and there's not a lot of loan forgiveness funds there. That was a hard thing for people to understand. That even if you qualify and you're at top ranked, the top project can take all the loan forgiveness funds, and then you wouldn't have any. So
That's true.
yeah. So I think this is very helpful, and we had a few other things I wanted to get to on our task force meeting, but before I kind of move on to that, because I did the key piece here was kind of talking with Water Development Board. Did any of the council members, Dito or Connie or Kelly, did you have any more specific questions to ask Dane?
Dane, maybe just one quick thing. If knowing that your normal cycle for the way the money goes is what you've just described, but let's assume that there's this, we're all hoping for this massive amount of federal money to drop down from above. And so you suddenly have a big pool of money you didn't realize you had. Would it be in our best interest to go ahead and get our PIFs in so that we are in essence in the queue for, okay, we didn't think we could do this year, but now we can. Let's see what's on the books for projects and look at moving ahead with those so we can get those funds dispersed as quickly as possible. So even though we can't get there this year, would it make good sense for us to go ahead and at least get you our PIFs in?
That's a very good point, and something I should have brought up. That's exactly what you should do, is to get those to us. In fact, you can do that just in the normal course of a project. Is, you're not sure if you're going to get funding this year, you could submit it, and then we just ask you each year if you want to roll it over. So, there's some communities that submit a lot of PIFs, and then they just roll them over. And so it may take a few years before they actually get funded. I don't know what the timing is on this one. But then also thinking about the federal funding, potential additional federal funding, that's what we would do. What we would probably do is reach out to you and just have you verify the budget is still good and the timing, because we ask you, for when you think you're going to get started with construction. So we would just ask you to update that information. So I think that's a good idea to get those submitted.
Thank you.
It's Kelly Kensler. I thought that maybe I could help Dane supplement some of his answer. So at 1 o'clock today, I'm actually attending a meeting on behalf of Blanco for the American Rescue Plan Act. And there are already dates that are submitted. A hard and fast date is going to be August 2nd, 2021. And the people that are managing those funds for the non-entitlement units of local government on the NEUs is the Texas Department of Emergency Management. So if anybody needs that information, I've got it. But as far as Blanco goes, we have that under control, and I believe we will be able to get whatever our allocation is. I guess I'll learn it at 1 o'clock today. But anyway, so there are hard and fast deadlines. It's not a wait game anymore. It's already out there.
Thanks.
Kelly, are those funds that could be applied to an infrastructure project like we're talking about here?
So originally when I read about them, I definitely thought they could be. When I started trying to figure out, because I knew that the state had the money. And there was some issues between the state and the federal government about the state managing it rather than just going straight to local units of government. So it looks like the state won out, and it's going to be managed through TDIM. So I was able to figure that out, and I was in, but what TDIM's description says versus what the federal description says is it says that the funding covers the COVID-19 related expenditures that were incurred between March 3rd, 2021 and December 31st, 2024. And so that's different than what the federal government's description of those funds were. And this is just the local fiscal recovery funds. So the answer right now is I don't know, because it appears once it got to Texas that it got way more restrictive.
And I think, and just is to help me not be confused, because I think we're talking about two different pools of money, but I want to make sure I'm clear on that. One is money that's already there. It's allocated. The Rescue Act is done. Those funds are out and they're about and they're being worked on. But then there's also the administration's infrastructure proposal that will probably, if it's going to pass, people are optimistic in DC that it will pass, but that won't be till the fall if we're lucky to have that pool of money come down for infrastructure work. So that's a second pool of money besides the one we're working on right now. Am I confused about that, or is that true?
No, I think that's true. That's my understanding as well, is that there's the infrastructure funds, which I definitely agree would be more appropriate for this. But the original guidelines that I saw, at least the national guidelines, they were a lot broader than what I'm reading. It seems like once they got to Texas, it got a little stricter. So that's something I want to bring up today, because I thought the non-entitlement units of government, such as the city of Blanco, I didn't understand that there really had to be expenses. We could, Blanco could use it for whatever they needed for the Recovery Act, as long as it was approved by the grantor, and it was very, very broad. And now the definition has been refined. So I will ask that question at the 1:00 meeting today and figure that out. But yes, the second round of money, the infrastructure money, I definitely think we would stand a chance.
And
Kelly,
those,
I
I
guess
think, are the
if you
PIF
find
too.
out, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Go
Mike.
ahead, Tommy. All right, I'll go. So Kelly, I guess if you find out information pertinent to this project at 1:00, if you just let us know, or let Connie or Indeed.
Absolutely. That's definitely the plan. I sure will.
Yeah, I want to echo that, Kelly. We've been looking at the ARPA funds because there's the local county allocations, but there's also a huge allocation that's coming to the state, I believe $16 billion.
Mhm.
And we have noticed that the way the state is defining how these funds can be used is much more restrictive. We're actually thinking at National Wildlife Federation about, making some noise about that, because it's problematic and really ties the hands of communities. So let us know what you find out, if you want to send a note through Nick or something, because I feel that it's unnecessary to restrict the funds in that way. I'm sure there's plenty of COVID related expenses that communities have incurred, and it's not going to be a problem for a lot of them, but it'd be nice to have a little more latitude for how to operationalize these in communities for what they're really needed
Again,
for.
these smaller communities too, that it's difficult to quantify those kind of things.
Yep.
As well.
Mhm.
That makes a very good point.
Yes. So
Okay.
with everybody, and if I find out anything, then I'll pass it on to Nick.
Do we have, Dane, was there anything else that you really were craving to let us know about, or any other quick questions for Dane?
Thanks. I dropped off for a second, but I'm back. I switched over. As far as from my standpoint, I was just pointing out that the green funding, I think, is a possibility. The basic requirement there is 30% of the costs of the project need to be considered green. And then we give a grant for up to 15% of the cost. So in the end, it ends up being about a 5% grant. So again, the dollar amount is not big, but it may be helpful for the project.
Dane, it's Connie. I just want to thank you, and all the folks at the Water Development Board are always so helpful. And I don't know how we get where we are without all that you guys do for us as little communities. So thank you for your time and your work and your patience. And thank goodness Kelly's here now. Maybe you won't have to keep dealing with those of us who have no clue what we're doing.
I had a good time working with Blanco. I mean, it's times it was a little difficult, but I think everybody was always very willing to work with us, and I had a good time. So far, so no problem from our standpoint, and I hope this is helpful today. And you can call me or email me for additional information. Email is usually the easiest, and I can provide links to help narrow anybody's search, because I know there's lots of information on our website.
Well, thank you very much, Dane. I appreciate you joining us, and appreciate Barney for connecting us very much. So
You're welcome.
All right. Well, there are a few other things that I really want to kind of get a handle on with the rest of this this meeting, and I have a feeling I'd be willing to stick around a little bit longer. I was not anticipating Water Development Board being quite that long, but I thought it was important to give them an opportunity, because this is a great time to ask the right questions to the right people. Certainly, I think that when it comes to what we recommend and recommend the city, and what the city has to be willing to do, I guess, will be a very tight coordination with TCEQ. If the city decides to either remand or amend that current application based on the recommendations, that's going to have to be coordinated with TCEQ to develop kind of a timeline to achieve what TCEQ needs Blanco to achieve, and to operate in the meantime. So with that, Barney, I had on here for you to kind of talk about your report. You did give a presentation to our task force last week, and but just to kind of coordinate for the 13th, my proposal to the city, I guess I went through DETA, was for the Aqua Strategies report to be presented, and then follow that up with kind of specific task force recommendations. So maybe I would like to introduce you and introduce us. Then you would give a quick run through of your report, and then I would present very specific recommendations or requests, and give the city an idea of how to actually implement those. Does that sound good to you in terms of the 13th? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, I can be there in person or in Zoom, whatever's best.
Okay.
Sounds like though you and I need to coordinate on those specific recommendations. Our report has some recommendations, and those task force recommendations may be slightly different or more detailed. So you and I ought to talk beforehand on how those are presented. But yeah, that sounds great to me in terms of.
I've got actually just, I've got it lined up to just give the bullet point recommendations from us that will be, in line with your report. But I thought there might be some additional, since your report ended, right, we're having these conversations with Water Development Board. The mayor, I believe, talked with Feroz. Feroz is supposed to talk with me later this week. I finally tracked him down with TCEQ to find out how we could weave these pieces together. But I'm a little nervous about the city feeling like they need to pull a trigger on something, and the timeline is a little bit tricky to me with Water Development Board funds, Water Development Board costs, and then also, but yes, I mean, I definitely want to coordinate with you. I don't think that there'll be any surprises or anything like that, but we just wanted to refine a little bit more about a path on how to achieve those recommendations that you have.
If I could, there are two issues that I think, and I've read, it's an awesome report, and yes, it is highlighted and it is marked, and all my confusing things and questions are in there. But the two things that I'd still like to have feel a little better about in looking at any of the recommendations. One is what we need to do, if anything, from a legal standpoint, since completing that discharge line was a settlement decision. So for the city of Blanco legally, if we're going to go back and do something different and not complete it as was specified, how do we do that and make sure that that's okay and that we have permission and that Mr. Palmer's going to be all right about that, et cetera. So there's that component to it. And the other one that that gives me a little trepidation is if we go with a TLAP permit, we sort of got into trouble last time because we had a contract for irrigation and then that went away. And so if we're doing agreements, in essence, land leases, you know what it's like when you don't own the property and you have a landlord, whether it's a residential landlord, a business landlord, or whatever, you're never in control of that property. So if
That's the key word, control.
Yeah, is in control. So if we decide we can handle it now because we have leases with landowners to be able to use irrigation, and that's great. But then one of those landlords later says, you know what, our lease is up now and we don't want you to do that anymore because we're going to sell it. And then we don't have adequate land to irrigate. Where does that put us? So that's my only, I am all about wanting this to work that's my concern. I don't want to end up with another Palmer 10 years from now where the owner of the property says you can't do that anymore and our lease was up 6 months ago and now you've been irrigating. And so yeah, that's it.
Well, that's the big hurdle with TLAP. One of the new rules that they've implemented now is that you can get these 210 reuse credits towards your TLAP, which is something that's where some of these additional leases can come in. And I've been doing some research on this, but the big question is working with TCEQ to find out what they will need and what the city will need to have that quote unquote control of those lands to be irrigated. What would need to be incorporated into a lease. And this is unfortunately, this is right at the top with Feroz as the person that is going to kind of help guide us on that, which is why I was really trying to get to him before our meeting. But the city owned land, that's no problem, but you need a little bit more. And how can we do that? And what would need to be required? The other thing is if you establish historical irrigation records and use, that strengthens your 210 reuse credits that you can get. And one thing that I have not seen and that I wanted to ask Ronnie about were the historic irrigation records of what's been going on. Do you just have like metered like when you irrigated and how much, or what kind of records were kept on that?
We keep still and always have kept daily irrigation records. Of course, I think we've gotten Barney pretty much everything we've had so far. And it's good to hear you bring that up, Miss Barron, is because that's one thing that the city of Blanco did go through for anybody that doesn't know the history of. When that property that Palmer currently owns was owned by Dan Brown, that's where we ended up in court litigation as far as having no property to irrigate on. This was many years ago. I want to think 2010, 11, 12 era, just to try to sum it up real quick. But that's where the city ended up turning into the looking more towards the discharge aspect of it. So we wouldn't have that issue. But of course, once the city did purchase that property, like Nick stated, we have property to irrigate on. Nobody can tell us no, but we do need more. So that puts us in the boat. But no, that's definitely some things that the city has gone through in the past as far as having a TLAP application or a TLAP permit with the current landowner and them stating that they don't want the water. So Yeah, it's been
Let
in
me
the
make
books.
a comment for Connie there to kind of clarify this. I talked to Sullivan, which is the Palmer's partner, when this thing was all going down a long time ago. The issue was that basically raw sewage, the pivots were stuck on this man's land and they were still pumping. And so it was like just raw sewage after raw sewage. And those problems have been corrected. Okay. So that's what started the man saying, get the heck off our property. Okay. So let's call it what it is. We've cleaned ourselves up way more than that. And the water now is perfectly acceptable for beneficial reuse, right?
Well,
So-
it is, but again, when we don't control that land, if that person is farming, irrigating now and then wants to sell it to a developer, my only concern is we got to have land to irrigate on. You know, we can always irrigate.
That is correct. TCEQ will guide us on what those contracts should look like and what those parameters of control are. So it's done, it's doable, and then maybe we get a little bit more than we need, right? You know, so that there's a buffer in there. So we're working constructively, but I'm just trying to say that the genesis of the guy canceling your contract was because you were fouling his property. Okay. So it wasn't.
Yeah, but we don't know what future's going to hold. The other part of this that I've really come to think about it, I apologize for not like bringing this piece up in my head in terms of how we've gone down this path, but really kind of clarified over the last few weeks for me and solidified is it was after this conversation I had with Mr. Turk, and just I think he's such a good, I'm just going to give him another plug because I think he's a really good advocate for, you know, trying to help the city and find those solutions and being open to lots of solutions. But what his desire is from an engineering standpoint is to give the city options, right? So that discharge pipe provides that, he calls it like, you know, your second parachute, right? If your first chute doesn't open, you got a second parachute. And that's a real comforting thing to have if you're a city to avoid a violation from TCEQ. What it is, it's an uncomfortable situation for the folks that are going to contest your permit if you go with that route, because maybe this council and this staff and this group in several years really is committed to no discharging, and we've got some lands and some short-term leases, and we're able to do that. But circumstances change, politics change, and in 3 years or 4 years, if we've got a discharge pipe and a lot of options, maybe Blanco decides, let's just pump all that stuff right into the river. So that's what the folks that are, you know, contesting the permit, or like Save Our Springs and those folks and Protect Our Blanco, are certainly concerned about as well. So the opportunity now to more codify a no discharge future is really important. And that's why I really feel even stronger about the task force recommendation if our goal truly is to keep discharge out of the river.
And I do want to say, Nick, on your presentation, I think that's so important because we talked about that last time. The council will change, the mayor will change, the people will change. So we're going to do the city council meeting this month in at Gem of the Hills again, so that we have large capacity. And we're going to promote this council meeting aggressively to get as many attendees there as possible. So you aren't just presenting these recommendations and the rationale behind it to the council, but hopefully you will be really presenting it to the citizens of Blanco so that they can begin to understand and be on board with those solutions and buy into it, so that the next election and the election after that, et cetera, there will be that strong philosophy and understanding of what we're trying to do and why, and buy in.
I think it would be great, Connie or Dita, if you guys could possibly get the city to print out some of Barney's reports to have there for people that are interested, that they could pick up a hard copy or something like that. I think that might be a really nice thing to do, especially if it's going to be at Gem of the Hills. You know, I'm looking at our time winding down, but I wanted to just bring up a couple of these key points and make sure that we're all on board with this. But we're going to continue to I'm going to have a talk with Feroz. And I think one of the key recommendations is going to be coming from this meeting, that the city, if there is still, if a if this TLAP and the interest in this project is still on the table and there's potential for federal infrastructure funds, that we get that PIF in to Water Development Board. That's a pretty clear, easy recommendation, something the city should do and could do quickly. Get that in, and then we'll find out what we're qualified for. And then the next, again, it's based on Barney's recommendations, but it's working with TCEQ to find out exactly what we need to get a TLAP before the city can really make a recommendation. I don't think the city can make a recommendation on the 13th that we're going to go TLAP, but they can say, we want to continue to pursue this. So you work with TCEQ to find it out. And then we need to get more clarity on these lease agreements that would need to be done, or if there's land acquisitions that could be conceived of or funded, that would be another option, as well as additional infrastructure. So I think what I want to do ultimately on the 13th is provide this insight that we've gotten from Water Development Board, whatever insight we continue to get from TCEQ, present Barney's recommendations, but say a clear recommendation is get your PIF in, have a meeting with TCEQ to find out two things. One, what do we need to do with our current regulatory permit structure to give us a little time to figure out, how we can make that TLAP happen? And two, what do we need to have in that TLAP in terms of lease agreements that can have control over that property, and as they relate to the 210 reuse credits. Finally, that key question you had, Connie, which was the first one, and that is, what do we do about Palmer being very, interested in getting something done on his property? So I know that, Joe or David, are y'all able to give just a quick note on what POB has been doing with Lauren, with communications? Joe, or David?
Yeah, no, I mean, the strategy that we've been using is that Palmer stood up at the last meeting and said, get this stuff off my property. So we're thinking like we're not exactly credible human beings as far as approaching him. But Lauren, being our attorney and communicating with their attorney, we're thinking actually has some credibility with them. So if Lauren has not disclosed where she's at on that, as far as the negotiation, but she has made contact with them. So I suspect they are communicating with their client, Mr. Palmer, and will get back to us to let us know what our course is going to be. So that's kind of where we're at.
Right. And Lauren also did, I had a conversation with Lauren earlier this week. She really helped me clarify and understand the TLAP requirements, and said that she'd be willing to just consult with the city if needed, but recommended that that the city hear it from the horse's mouth, which is TCEQ, really on what you need. So I think that's going to be a big piece, and the city might be feeling pressure from Mr. Palmer to go ahead and get that pipeline in. So figuring out how to buy some time there, if that's possible, and then that brings me to my last question for today, because I think I've got enough to kind of parse out the next pieces. But is the city attorney? What is the situation with the city attorney in Blanco? Because that was a problem in terms of getting our first engineering study going, and there's is the city attorney going to be willing to discuss some of these things with us? Because I feel like all of these things need to be run through the city attorney, right? Whatever TCEQ says we can do, Brad would need to be present and advising the city and hearing straight from TCEQ. And I just want to make sure that line of communication is going to be available. Or maybe you don't know, but that would be, to me, a key piece. If we don't have the city attorney in lockstep with the city and the task force, that's going to be very difficult.
I mean, as of currently, we've just been bringing in the city attorney on as needed basis, I guess. But I know if he's not going to be there present at the meeting, he will always be in a phone-in option if you wanted to be advised that way.
Mm.
Yeah,
Kelly,
Nick,
do you have any thoughts?
Connie, who are you asking that
Kelly,
to?
I was wondering if
Oh,
Kelly
Kelly.
had any thoughts or insights on how to proceed from this standpoint. I don't know if she's still there.
I'm here.
she's-
Sorry, I couldn't get myself off of unmute. My only concern about it, obviously not knowing everything, I did speak, Mr. Palmer approached me at the last meeting and said, can you just simply comply with the court order? He kind of took me back. I'd only been there for a week or two. And so what concerns me is that there is a court order out there telling us what to do. And if we do not want to comply with the court order, then we need to go through the courts. And that's my only thought on it right now, is that I don't want the city of Blanco to be in contempt of court. And I think that Palmer is going to get frustrated enough if we don't do something that might be where we end up.
I tend to agree with Kelly on that too, because I sense that. And
hey, Nick, didn't Palmer say at the meeting, he'd be happy to not have the pipe on his land too? Wasn't that one of his responses?
it was
It sure
when he
was.
phoned in.
He was speaking of being able to save the money if the pipe's not going in, but which of course that's what the whole basis of this task force is for, to prevent that in any which way possible. But I do, like I said, Kelly touched on it as well, that there is a court order. I don't know if we need to get back with Palmer, maybe meet up with Palmer or something and kind of go over some of these things, or if it's something that the attorneys need to deal with or such, if we wanted to change that. I just, again, standpoint of the city, I don't want to be the one holding up the stuff with Palmer and then end up getting a backlash from that, but definitely needs something to be looked into, I guess.
Yeah, and I
So
think Ronnie. Oh, go ahead. Who's that?
It's Kelly. I agree with Ronnie 100%. The only thing that I can clarify for Ronnie is that once you're in court and you have counsel representing you, such as in the Palmer case, then the city should not even be speaking to Palmer about, the two attorneys should be speaking. And so that's literally why I politely removed myself from the conversation, because I had no business speaking to, a defendant and a plaintiff should not speak to each other if you've already got attorneys. And so this is not something that we can iron out with Palmer. This is something that has to be ironed out through the courts.
Right. And
Actually, Kelly, as a recovering lawyer, I mean, the principals are welcome to talk to each other unless their lawyers tell them otherwise. And a lot of times that's how things get resolved, is to get away from the litigators. And I am one. So.
You're not a litigator.
And I think that what Kelly was saying too was, as Palmer, my understanding is a member of Protect Our Blanco as well. So maybe there was an opportunity to have that conversation the way that Lauren Ice is approaching that with his attorney. So I think that conversation is needing to happen. And will happen. And Ronnie, I know everybody's probably needing to get on to other things or, have low blood sugar at this point. But a big question I have for you, Ronnie, real quick, before we go, in terms of just if we need to tread water for a little bit on the current plant and in current configuration, Barney listed in his report, and you've discussed this other additional acreage that you have some type of agreement on to irrigate. And I'm just wondering of the status of that, when it could be available, what information you can actually provide so that we can, talk to TCEQ and say, look, we want to go this other way. In the meantime, we've got our city land and we've got this other property, but that's all I know, is that it's some other property, like 60 something acres.
Right. It's the Chamaco property that's adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant. I know I'm going to throw the wrong number out there, but I don't know why I had like 45 acres, 48 acres in my head.
Yeah.
From there. Now, the last time we met, the only update I had is that they had, piping on the ground and such. Now the trenches are all dug. Everything's wide open. They've got a pump and such installed. Now we don't have a TLAP agreement with this property.
Right. No, I get that.
The only agreement we have with this property is for them to allow us the access easement to the wastewater plant. The exchange was irrigable water. That has to be revisited to see if we're not, by chance hurt anything or what. Last time we did look it up, we were able to utilize that agreement with our reclaimed water authorization, but they're looking to they're wanting to start this pump up by the end of next week. I know this rain has been pushing us back. They were hoping to do it by this week, but
Okay.
they've got, open lines ready to put irrigation equipment in the ground and be able to utilize that water. Now, what we don't know is because there's not a TLAP, we can't, I guess, force or make them, anybody for that matter.
No.
utilize the water.
I'm just talking about right now in the interim, right, as we're
Sure.
trying to line these things out. And you said that's Chamaco. How do you pronounce? How do you spell that?
CHAMACO.
CHAMACO. And that is an agreement that has been signed with the city, or is it, I assume, to get the infrastructure, or is that through Public Works, or what do you have there on that agreement?
No, well, I believe the actual agreement we had was transferred through the previous landowner there. And the reason, again, I don't have eyes or hands on this documentation or what should be housed there at City Hall. But from what my understanding is, the agreement was for them to allow us the access easement. They had the availability of water. So
Okay.
that's what they're looking to cash in on and start to utilize as quick as possible.
Connie or Dita or Kelly, do you think that we could get some kind of documentation on this by the meeting, or, send it over so that we can, I can have that conversation with Feroz as
Sure.
well on, what kind of agreement we have and how that lines up with authorization. I feel like that should be somewhere, right? The city's got to have it somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, if not, we could just go online, I would think, and get it from the court.
Well, the plan would be to, yes, get that documentation and get it out to this force. That way, again, that's going to only help us out with any type of land use ability and everything from there.
Yeah.
So definitely get that to you as quick as we can.
We've been doing really good with what the city has currently available. This additional irrigation land, I feel like, that's something that maybe you can get us through a little while as we try to get that additional storage and configure TLAP agreements. But what we have to do is get TCEQ on board with the plan, and that's going to be real critical. So having this agreement available for us to consider as a task force, I really appreciate that. Ronnie, if you could get that, or Kelly or Connie or Dita, somebody from the city. But that's good. That's good information.
But what's your basic, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, you just want a copy of the court order?
I think so. If that's
Okay,
what
but
Ronnie's using to irrigate on that Chamaco property.
Right.
Okay. We will make sure and get that for you. Thank you.
I'm a little bit confused. It was a court order for the Chamaco property? Or I thought I understood Ronnie to say that was a contract that
Yeah, like a
got
lease or
from
something.
a lease or
Right.
something from a previous owner that transferred to the new owners.
Right. I guess at this point, I can't say whether or not it was a court order or just a lease agreement kind of thing or what. That's just my understanding, what I've been told over the years. But I guess when we have that document in hand, we'll know exactly what it is and what it means. But from my understanding,
Certainly.
in the years I've been here, was just an agreement for accessibility to water, to the treated wastewater for exchange of the access, easement.
To the land.
Yeah.
I'm sure whoever these current owners are must have something that they're operating on. If they're wanting to hold us to that contract, I mean, they
Right.
must have a copy of it, right?
It's my understanding that they have the contract in hand and know it word for word, but
Okay,
I haven't
Okay.
seen it, of course. But no, but
Okay.
and just to add a little bit there. I mean, they've probably spent I believe their pump system was $60,000.
Okay.
They've recently.
they're ready
spent
for this
30
money.
Oh yes, ma'am. No, they're actively,
Mhm.
very actively wanting to utilize this water.
Okay,
I would
That would only help us.
I would
Right.
think we would want to make sure that we see the contract they have as well,
Yes.
to make sure the contract they have is the contract we have, because
Yes.
let's face it, our documents in the city are less than in order and easy to access. So if Ronnie, you know these folks well, making sure Kelly has their contact information,
Sure.
so they would share with the city their contract that they have with us, for us to
Right.
make sure it matches, or that we find one in the city that is the same.
I agree with that. Okay, so we're gonna get this, Chimako, I will just send you guys my bulleted list of recommendations this afternoon, kind of based on this conversation. It may get changed a little bit if we have a conversation with Feroz, but I'll share all of that with you. But I don't know, what time do you need something to get it in the backup for the agenda on the 13th?
The actual cutoff for the agenda is today. Anything to be added to the agenda package would be Friday.
Friday.
Because it Friday
So-
afternoon.
So although the deadline is today, it's an internal deadline. And if we need an extra day, this is really important to make sure that we get it on. So if we need another day, we can certainly do that. This is just an
Yeah.
internally imposed deadline.
Well, my understanding is that the agenda item has been requested by Dita. This would just be for backup, I guess, which would be maybe a copy of that agreement and then my PowerPoint that we'll give.
Sure.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate this, guys. I know this ran a little over, but this is kind of, I don't know, we call it back on the ranch nut cutting time. So we got to make sure we get this done, and I appreciate it. I think that we're on a good path here. We just got to continue that conversation with Palmer and TCEQ, and we've got some good information from Water Development Board, and maybe an opportunity from the heavens to get some federal infrastructure dollars to see this happen. So appreciate everybody's time today, and we'll be following up. Just watch your email for something that comes from me on recommendations. So
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Nice to meet everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.